Welcome to Man in America, a voice of reason in a world gone mad. I'm your host, Seth Holhouse. Something that continually interests me is the ongoing deep diving into understanding who really controls this world. To think that maybe early on in your journey, you think you have this idea that, it's a bunch of different countries all made up of different leaders and they're all battling out for control, kind of like the different states in America. There's different states and governors. But as you start researching, you start discovering that there are multiple layers and layers of control over top of these countries. There are the corporations, there's the banking, there's the military, there are different kinds of entities and shadowy figures and organizations and secret societies that are manipulating and controlling the world in ways that it makes it very difficult for us to understand. But whenever I find someone who's done deep dives into this kind of research, I'm always so fascinated by it. So my guest today is a lovely woman. Her name is Colonel Towner-Watkins. She is a former U.S. Air Force colonel, retired, who is absolutely brilliant, extremely well-researched. But what we're going to be talking about today specifically is something called Operation Gladio, and why in her course of research, discovering Operation Gladio was one of the most important discoveries that she made in understanding how these control mechanisms are put into place around the world. And when you look at Gladio, it kind of opens up Pandora's box and understanding, oh my goodness, this is the playbook for overthrowing countries, for bringing in corporate control, and so much more. So in today's show, we're going to be diving into looking deep into the origins and the pyramids of control coming out of the city of London and through various countries and the banking industry and the drug trade and the CIA and so much more. So it's going to be a very fun and deep episode. So I hope you enjoy it. Before we get started, I just want to remind people that every show that I do is a podcast as well. So if you want to listen on Apple Podcasts or Spotify or whatever, just search for Man in America and you'll find me on there. Also, just a big thank you to anybody that's watching on Rumble and supporting a free speech platform. Actually, I think I'm currently under a strike right now on YouTube. I put up a video about the C word and how you can cure it without using the mainstream ways. And I got a strike, and so I think I'm currently banned from posting on YouTube for another couple of days or something, which is why it's so important that you are watching and following on Rumble, because the team at Rumble is amazing, and they've never once come close to censoring me. In fact, I get more encouragement from their team saying, hey man, good job, keep at it. So if you're watching on Rumble, thank you. And if you are watching on Rumble, take a second right now, hit that thumbs up button. Just take a quick second. You're going to feel good. I'm going to feel good about it. Hit that thumbs up button, because it's important to see that you're engaged on Rumble and that you're liking the content. And if you really want to, leave me a comment on there. I don't always respond. I'm bad at that, but I read almost every single comment that you leave. I really appreciate the feedback, good or bad, that you give me. So anyway, thank you again, and please enjoy this interview with the Colonel. Colonel Towner-Watkins, it's an honor to have you on the show. Thank you so much for visiting us today.
Thanks for having me.
So you're a retired colonel, U.S. Air Force, if I'm not mistaken.
Right.
I'll let you give a little bit of your own background. I look at your wall of pins and diplomas and everything there. So I'll let you give your own introduction, which will do better than me.
So I have 30 years in the Air Force, and I enlisted as an airman basic and worked my way up to colonel, thanks to the taxpayers' investment in me. I spent most of my adult life in some type of an educational program. I have 6 different degrees, and none of them are related to, well, one may be semi-related to what my last 3 years worth of research has been in. I do a lot of reading. I have been an avid reader my whole life, and I've only ever read nonfiction. And so the extent of knowledge that I have about history is fairly deep. And it's very rare that I come across a book that has information in it that kind of like knocks me out. That was up until 3 years ago. I've read over 120 books now just on Operation Gladio. once I found it. And every single book that I read knocks me for a loop. And it is so critical that people understand what it is, because you are seeing it play out in real world, like in Venezuela and what was happening in Bangladesh, because it involves a group of people that we, for the most part, don't even know their names. I refer to them as the international syndicate that works collectively to monopolize resources. And by resources, I'm talking about people, I'm talking about minerals, I'm talking about oil, I'm talking about every form of resources that are on Earth. They want to control it. And that's kind of where I would like to start, because if people understand this life cycle, they'll understand so much of what they're seeing play out today. And this international syndicate goes back, some people can track it back 200 years. I basically tracked it back to the end of the late 1800s in a group called the Fabian Society. And the Fabian Societies was full of anarchists, eugenicists, and all kinds of people, primarily in the city of London. And names that you recognize come out of this: Cecil Rhodes, Balfour, the Rothschilds, all of that. And they spread across the Atlantic into the United States in the form of like the Council on Foreign Relations and that type of thing. And they were very vocal about what they wanted. They wanted one world government, and they said it. One world government. We were all shocked when people discovered that George Bush Sr. said it, in an address during his presidency. It goes so much farther back than that. And this group of people basically had set up a concept that these corporations, that they're on the boards of the transnational corporations and that they control, at the time in the early 1900s, they paid for their own intelligence and their own mercenaries to go into countries like Iran and take over the oil, into Africa, and colonize them. We are all familiar with the British Empire, the Spanish Empire, the Dutch Empire, but they all had cost of doing business because they had to pay for their own mercenaries and they had to pay for their own intelligence. Well, that all changed after World War II. And oh, by the way, the Fabian Society said they'd have their one world government with 3 wars. So after World War II, we, for the first time worldwide, had standing militaries and central intelligence agencies all across the world. Every country set up a central intelligence counterpart. Well, that was great for the transnational corporations that are running this whole thing, because they don't have to pay for them now. That increased their profits tremendously. So now that cost was offloaded to all of the taxpayers around the world. We're paying for their intelligence and their military. And by the way, I can draw a direct correlation to all of the military engagements post-World War II to the resources and the companies that were responsible for whatever false flag that got us into the wars. Okay?
Okay. Let me jump in real quick, because I want to, it's okay, I'll do it periodically because I want to make sure I'm following you. So first off, you seem, similar to me, though, way much more well-researched, and that you just keep digging and digging and digging. And I imagine you're not researching birds. You're researching the global control structure. You're peeling back the veil of who's really running this world. And so that you're saying a couple of years ago when you discovered Operation Gladio, it's almost like you found their hidden playbook. You found the tools and the strategies that would be used. And so you talk about how in the late 1800s, the international, is it called the International Syndicate? Is that what you?
Yes. International.
Basically, you have this international syndicate and how they built this corporatocracy, this layer of these, multinational corporations that at that time had their own hitmen and militaries that they would then use these corporations to go in, overthrow government, seize resources, etc. But then post World War II, after in the advent of the intelligence agencies, Mossad, CIA, etc.,
CIA in Korea, the BND in Germany, yeah, every one of them,
that they were then able to then have these corporations use these militaries and private contractors and hitmen.
We're not even to the private contractors yet.
Oh, okay. So kind of, I mean, part of this reminds me of what I read and what I when I interviewed John Perkins, economic hitman, talking about how
exactly
Exxon had their own private military in Ecuador, and it's like, okay, that doesn't make sense, but it does.
It does.
So to make sure that I'm following, and I'll let you continue because this is like right up my alley in terms of what I'm interested in.
Okay. So they've offloaded their expense account onto the taxpayers post World War II.
Ladies and gentlemen, our world is being poisoned. You know that. Every day we're exposed to more chemicals sprayed into our skies, leaching into our food, and polluting our air and water. From pesticides and heavy metals to hormone disruptors and synthetic additives, these toxins are bombarding our bodies and destroying our health. But there's something you can do to fight back, and it starts with your gut. Kimchi One from Brightcore Nutrition contains over 900 strains of beneficial probiotics that help flush toxins, restore gut balance, and support your immune system. So when your gut's strong, your body can actually resist all these toxins. You're going to feel better. You're going to have better digestion, more energy, clearer thinking, stronger immunity, even improvements in your skin, hair, and metabolism. And this isn't just hype. Studies show that fermented foods like kimchi can reduce the risk of obesity, improve blood sugar, and support whole body wellness. Kimchi One is all natural, non-GMO, dairy-free, gluten-free, and 100% made in the USA by a company that actually cares about your health. Imagine that. And today, you can get an exclusive offer just for my viewers, 25% off with the code MAN in America by clicking on the link in the description below, or just call my friends over at Brightcore now at 888-575-6488, and their educated staff will make sure that Kimchi One is right for you. Again, that's 888-575-6488.
Who did they hire to go into the CIA? They're not you and I. They're Wall Street bankers. They're Wall Street lawyers. They're college professors. These are the people that are like the Praetorian Guard for the transnational organizations. They're their foot soldiers. So they all have allegiance to these same transnational organizations, and they are who makes up the CIA. So it's very, very interesting. And of course, your senior military officers, they all go work for the military industrial companies after. So there's a grooming process that goes on in the military by sending our senior officers to the Harvard professional management and all of those types of places. And they're groomed to be the people that then transition into these multinational companies in order to perpetuate this cycle. Okay, so we've got that step. So now we have all of these on the taxpayer dimes. What happened after 9/11? What happened, well, actually it started after Desert Storm. We had, but it like peaked, back to your point about the private military. After 9/11, there's this explosion of private intelligence and private military companies, right? Because now we're operating in two theaters. Oh my God, we're overwhelmed. We were never overwhelmed. That was never too big. Number one, we shouldn't have been there, but it was never too big. Our entire military footprint was two theater wars. That was in the same theater. That was not passed, but they used that as an excuse to start privatizing and outsourcing from both the CIA. So now the CIA has a ton of contractors and the military has a ton of contractors. Well, if you follow the footprints of those military contractors, whether it's Blackwater, now Academy, and you start doing a wiring diagram, who all owns them? The International Syndicate. They now own all of the major. So think about this. Not only did we pay for their intelligence and military by creating a standing military after World War II and the CIA, that the CIA has never worked for the American people. They have always worked for this group. But now, through our taxpayer dollars being funneled through the DOD, now Secretary of War, and the CIA, and these companies who now has a direct line back to the international syndicate, they're profiting off of our taxpayer dollars.
Oh, so
they
basically,
are making a fortune.
So what I think you're kind of lifting the lid off of the military-industrial complex, right? And so, and intelligence. So if you look at companies like Battelle or Boeing or Lockheed Martin or Palantir, you have all of these, which a lot of these companies have very kind of ominous origins, like, Palantir, for instance, or Oracle.
Shows on Battelle. I'm very familiar with them.
Oh, see, I had family that actually still works for Battelle, because I grew up in Ohio, and there are multiple Battelle facilities in Ohio.
Yes, there are.
Yep. And so basically, you have this small group of the cabal, the international syndicate, this small group of these power players, wealthy families, bankers, etc. They have these layers of multinational corporations with immense control that are, not even, they exceed the power of even countries and nation states, because they're these global entities. But then how they have tapped into create these basically private military, private intelligence, private. Yeah. So you have all these, Navy SEALs and these kind of heavy hitting mercenaries that then go into private contracting. And they might be, you might trace it up in the line and figure out that it's actually Exxon that somehow is funding the overthrow of a country to seize the oil reserves of some African country, right?
Yes. And one of the most, and I know the Economic Hitman covered this, but Chile is probably one of the best examples of that, where you had PepsiCo, ITT, and at the time, Anaconda Mining, which was interested because at the time Chile was the #1 copper mining country in the world. And they literally went to President Nixon and said, we'll pay you to get rid of Salvador Allende. And who did they send? They sent the CIA.
The jackals.
Yeah. So let's go back. So now that you have the straw man, you have the actual concept, because that's critically important. So after World War II, well, not even after, during World War II, there's a critical meeting that most people don't even know happened at the end of the war. It happened in northern Italy, and it involved Allen Dulles and a major general by the name of Lyman Lemonsker. He was the chief logistician for General Eisenhower, who was the commander in Europe. Okay. Now, why would a logistician go to a pre-end of war meeting with the spy master of the OSS? Well, there's a guy by the name of General Wolfe. Wolfe had created a program called werewolf units. And werewolf units had another name called stay-behind units. And General Wolfe had Reinhard Gehlen, who worked for him on the Eastern Front. Reinhard Gehlen's #1 trainer of stay-behind units, werewolf units, was Otto Skorzeny. And they went behind as the Eastern Front plunged into Russia at the during World War II, and they were planting stay-behind units. And their thought was that they would bury caches of weapons and train normal day citizens to be mercenaries, assassins, whatever. And they had explosive guns, money, and communication equipment in all these caches. And if the Russians pushed back, which they did, then the idea was these stay-behind units would pop up behind the front and sabotage them from the rear. That's why they were called stay-behind units. They were in Ukraine, Hungary, Yugoslavia, everywhere on what became eventually Eastern Europe. And they had them in France, they had them in Austria, they were everywhere that was under German control. So General Wolfe's deal with Allen Dulles was, we will turn over the map and the people involved in our program for the freedom, the rat lining out of certain high-level people that control this network and will work for you. We Nazis will work for Allen Dulles in the future, and we will spread this tentacle all over the world. We'll put them in Iran. We'll put them in Korea. We'll put them in South America. And they did. They put them in Egypt. And I've been able to trace these networks all over. Now think about this. These are people that are basically trained mercenaries that you can pick up the phone worldwide and have them do anything you want. So that meeting happens. Lyman Lemmesker then goes back to Germany, and Dwight D. Eisenhower, who goes on to be president that uses this network, and says, here's what we're going to do. I'm going to set up and supply, get rid of the German munitions, and we're going to take the excess of World War II munitions, and we're going to resupply all of these stay-behind networks, and we're going to set them up in all of NATO. And so NATO sets up, and they have a secret agreement that Daniel Ganser talks about in his book, NATO's Secret Armies, that every NATO country has to sign saying you're going to set up Gladio units. Every NATO country. So every country that signed on to NATO set up their version. Now they're called different things. Like in Turkey, they're called Grey Wolves. In Portugal, they were called a Ginger Press. So they have different names. In France, they were the OAS. So they have different names. But Operation Italy's program was called Gladio. And the reason you now generically call this entire infrastructure Gladio is because Italy first exposed it. They were the first country in 1990 to go, yeah, we kind of have Gladio and we kind of have been. So the whole auspices that they decided collectively they were going to use to sell this to the very few people they told about it is we have to have them because of communism. You know, this is literally the day after World War II stops. 50 million dead in the Soviet Union. They're not coming over the Volga Gap. They can't even get their shit together. So they're not a threat. Literally the day after, we've got this entire stay behind unit program adopted throughout Europe due to the communist threat that basically doesn't exist. And another point that I'd have to make at this point is when there was the term communist used, you have to be very careful. I'm not saying communism doesn't exist, but there has been a propaganda campaign that our government participated in that labeled anything they didn't like a communist. You see it happening right now. Now we're using Nazis, but that's kind of two wings of the same bird. Oh, you're a Nazi. Oh, you're a communist. And they do that psychologically to control people. Well, I don't want to do this because you'll call me a Nazi, and I don't want to do this because you'll call me a communist, and it's control. It's called the strategy of tension. If you create a far right and a far left, you can push everybody into psychologically doing what you want them to do. Otherwise, you're going to call them names. So after Italy was freed from Mussolini, there was a lot of very poor Italians that wanted to labor-wise organize. Well, weirdly enough, there was a lot of American companies in Italy during Mussolini. Most people don't know that. A lot. Because it was really totalitarianism or fascism where the corporations basically control everything. It's the mini version of what I just described. The corporations are all there, and they get a stick figure called Mussolini to run all of the terrorism and lock people up and terrorize them with their special police. And then the workers are all just exploited. So that's what Italy had been through. So as soon as the workers began forming unions against these transnational presence in Italy, they were labeled communist. And whether that's the appropriate term for a laborist who basically wants a fair wage, you can debate all day long. But they were not communist as what you and I have been brainwashed to believe. They did not want the government to own anything. They wanted a fair wage. So they were labeled a communist by the CIA immediately. And then the CIA spent $35 million in 1948 to elect the president that was favored joining NATO, as opposed to the one that was running against them that did not want to be in NATO. They didn't want to be in anything. They had just got rid of Mussolini. They just wanted to be free. That was not acceptable, because we have to have everybody in NATO. And you see that playing out right now. We're in Georgia, we're in Slovakia. We criticize Hungary all the time because he opposes the approved talking points of NATO. So literally everything I'm telling you right about this happened 80 years ago is still happening today, which is why you have to understand it, because it makes everything going on today make so much more sense. Okay, so that's the very first election interference the CIA participated in 1948, literally right out of the gate. So now we have these stay behind units, and everybody signed up to be part of it. And so I had been researching this for about a year, and I was sitting reading a book, and I just like threw myself back in the chair, and I'm like, holy crap, we're in NATO. Where's our stay behinds? Who's our stay behinds? We had to sign the same document. So then I went off on this rabbit hole that I'm still in, that I looked at every, so let me just make this point too. So while we use communism as the mechanism to justify setting these things up, never once in 80 years were they ever used to combat communism, not once. They were 100% used to create domestic terrorist events to control the people within the country. 100% of the time, they created terrorism domestically to effect change in their own people. So in Italy, you had the Bologna bombing, you had the train station bombing, you had a bank bombing, you had cops assassinated on the street, all eventually, initially they were all called, the Red Brigade did it, it's communist, they're going to destroy our country. Not a single instance was it a communist that did any of those domestic terror events. Every single one of them was done by Gladio. And if you recall, when John Paul II, his attempted assassination in the Vatican, do you remember that event?
No.
Where he was shot? John Paul II, when the Pope was shot? That was a Gladio operator from Turkey. He was a member of their Grey Wolf unit. So they travel. They travel amongst themselves. 2 French OAS agents was in Dallas when JFK was assassinated. What their role is, I don't know, but it has been verified 2 of them were there.
So basically, okay, so you have these stay behind units, which is really, it's somewhat of like a 5th column, right? It's this.
Think Antifa. Think Antifa.
Exactly. And so you have these units that I'm sure these units have infiltrated the far left and the far right, because it's again, it's pincher movement, right? Hidden from both sides, strategy of tension, right? And so what they've done is that they have used these units to create, to have, false flags, etc., to, Hegelian dialectic, problem, reaction, solution. The towers are down. Blame the Muslims and bring in the Patriot Act, right, to protect us from the Muslims, right?
Exactly.
And so you've seen the same pattern play out all over the world, especially looking at NATO countries to kind of bring this together, with the seat of a lot of this power coming out of the city of London, through the banking families, etc.
All roads lead to London.
Yep. Yes. And so then what you're seeing and how you're tying it to now, looking at America now, even as recently as the Charlie Kirk assassination, right? Which to me, there's no way I believe that it was just some lone gunman. It's like, it was JFK 2.0. All of a sudden, everyone's like, oh, it was a lone gunman. It's like, okay. Same as
Has it ever been a lone gunman?
Exactly. Same with Butler. It's like, oh, just some random kid that, okay, there's no way I believe that.
Never a lone gunman.
So you're seeing these same patterns, though, playing out in America and creating this. And while a lot of people will then, it's funny because what I've found in researching this is that there's so many layers to this. And some people might scrape past the first layer of deception and say, oh, it wasn't the lone gunman, it was the CIA. It was Mossad, right? But even that, though, is still just another mask that's hiding, and it's hiding and hiding. And so they have these layers, but they're using the intelligence agencies. But as you mentioned, it's not the intelligence agencies that we think of that are controlled by the U.S. government. These are rogue agencies that are being run by.
I wouldn't go that far. There is a direct line from the U.S. government to the CIA. I'm just telling you, they ignore it.
Yes. Oh, I see. Okay.
So it's a proven fact that in the past, both in Chile, Guatemala is a great example. When we overthrew the government in 1954, the year after we overthrew Iran in 1953, in Guatemala, you had CIA agents on the ground, and there's declassified cables saying there's no communists here. There's no communists here. Yet all of the official intelligence assessments produced in Washington all called him communist. He has communist affiliations. It's the hallmark, stealing John Brennan's line, it's the hallmark of Russian disinformation. It's the hallmark of communism. And that's all that got printed in the press here, because they're all controlled by him as well, that there were communists running literally everywhere in Guatemala. So we have to, Monroe Doctrine, we have to go overthrow the government. And it wasn't any of that. That all boiled down to United Fruit owning basically all of their arable land under corrupt land deals by buying off the elite class in Guatemala. And I think it was Arbenz gets elected, and he goes, yeah, we're not going to do that anymore. We're going to give you the taxable value of that land, which you have paid taxes for the last, 20 years on $1 million. Here's your $1 million in a deal. Wasn't paid all in one chunk, but he said, here's your $1 million. And United Fruit immediately goes, no, it's worth 20 million. And then Arbenz goes, well, you owe me a shit ton of money then, because you've only been paying taxes on $1 million. And so United Fruit just calls up Alan Dulles, who used to be their attorney, and says, hey, take him out. And we took him out. And so that's literally how these things work. So United Fruit got to stay down there. It became Chiquita Banana. And they were just sued in Miami within the last couple of years and had to pay out tens of millions of dollars for the amount of people they were responsible for killing because of these types of activities. And United Fruit was in Cuba. United Fruit was in Nicaragua. They were all over Latin America doing this kind of stuff. And so it brings you to the real world stuff of the coup that just happened in Bangladesh. If you look at that coup, 100% USAID, which is now a CIA front, it's now gone, but you still have the National Endowment for Democracy, and it does exactly the same thing. It's probably worth talking about that for just a second, because in the 1970s, the CIA, all of those hearings about the CIA, they got outed as doing all of these coups. So what they decided to do was set up all of these other organizations like USAID, which technically had already existed.
Here's the hard truth. Every 6 years, your dollar loses half its buying power. That means a $100,000 savings account today could feel like $50,000 by 2031. And you see it every time you fill up your tank, buy groceries, or pay the bills. Prices are up. Your dollar's down. But there's a simple way to protect the value of your savings with something real, something proven. Gold. An asset that holds its value over time. And that's why I trust Noble Gold Investments. They make it simple to protect your savings with physical gold or silver. No high-pressure sales, No call centers, just honest guidance, one-on-one support, and transparent pricing. And right now, when you open a qualified account, Noble Gold will send you a free 10-ounce silver American flag bar as a thank you. So head over to goldwithseth.com or call 626-654-1906 today to learn more. Again, that's goldwithseth.com or 626-654-1906. Don't just protect your wealth, preserve its power.
And so the National Endowment for Democracy was set up in the early 1980s by Ronald Reagan, right about the time we're going to do Iran-Contra, weirdly enough. And they started funding. It has 4 pots of money, basically. And it's very important what pots they are. They have a Democrat pot, they have a Republican pot, they have a union pot, and they have a Chamber of Commerce pot. And they do collectively regime change. So there's 3 elements to control, to power: economic, political, and military. We already got the military. So the union and the chamber, those 2 things that are supposed to hate each other, they work collectively together with political warfare. So the National Endowment for Democracy, the Democrats and Republicans, 2 wings of the same bird, basically split. Hey, we'll do this country, you do that country. You do this country, we'll do that country. And they work with these 2 other pots to infiltrate the unions on behalf of the transnational organizations. And the chamber represents the transnational organizations. And they collectively just swoop in and overthrow a government using the CIA and USAID. And there's probably no better example modern day than Venezuela. If you go back and you look at Venezuela, as soon as they nationalized their oil company and kicked the transnationals out, and I don't know if your audience knows, but the Rockefellers basically owned almost the entire food distribution network. Nelson Rockefeller was down there and owned a whole bunch of grocery stores. They were just infiltrated. And in each of these cases, they develop a corrupt elite. Same thing happened in Cuba. You develop this, in order for this type of corruption and control to go on, you have to have an elite group of people in the country that you can control, just like here. So when the country gets overthrown, who do you think comes here as expats? This corrupt people that had been in bed with the transnationals. So now think Miami, where you have all of these Venezuelans and all of these Cubans all come and set up shop in Miami. And they're not great people, I'm sorry to tell you. Are there a lot of great people that are Cuban and Venezuela? Absolutely. But embedded in that is all of these corrupt elite people, because they've got to flee the country because they did some really nasty things. The same thing happened in Nicaragua when we got rid of the CIA installed Somoza government. The same thing happened in Chile when we got rid of Pinochet, or when we installed Pinochet. So you have all of these, and these refugees all come to America, and they're controlled on where they set up camp, like Somalia in Minnesota, so that they are able to control the local networks. And that's how all of this stuff affects us today. Everybody likes to say, all of our political class likes to say, oh, Venezuela, Maduro's not legitimate. Their elections are corrupt. That they use the same machines we do. Oh, and by the way, the 3 guys that set that up was part of this elite class that moved to the United States in Miami. The machines were actually created in a Florida business in Miami. So tell me again how they're corrupt. They elected our president. So what do you say in here? And no one can explain that. Oh, it's corrupt when it's used over there. Well, then it would be corrupt when it's used here if it's corruptible. It literally, when you start understanding the depth of depravity of what they have set up, it allows you to see things so much crystal clear of what's going on, and you can call them out in real time. I call it wearing your Gladio glasses, because once you understand the depths of depravity of these people, you can put nothing past them. So let's jump back in time to having all of those things set up, and they're operating. There's terrorist attacks domestically all over Europe for controlling those people. Well, again, I had that devastating moment when I was like, what the hell? Where's ours? So if you go back, and you made the brilliant point of them being on the left and right, okay? So on the left, you might recall the Weather Underground and all the domestic terrorists. And then on the right, you may recall the Cuban exiles, right? Those were all, and all of them, especially the Cuban exiles. I mean, there's so much documentation on them being directly changed or trained by the CIA. And then they were forward deployed wherever they wanted them. We had Cuban exiles fighting mercenary wars in Angola under Reagan. We had them in Nicaragua under Reagan. We had them in El Salvador setting up death squads, killing people, which gave the birth to MS-13. And we had them in Colombia. And what did that buy us? Oh, the Crystal Triangle of Peru, Bolivia, and Colombia. So let's take that for just a second. If you go back, this is a big undertaking. Post-World War II. How did they fund all of this? Yeah, we got some weapons as surplus after World War II. The Marshall Fund had a covert funding element, and it and the Rockefeller Foundation were the initial fundings for NATO's secret army. They used part of the Marshall Plan Fund to set it up there. But as I told you, it was literally set up everywhere.
So real quick, so the Marshall Fund, wasn't that post-World War II? It was a kind of a global investment strategy to rebuild the world after the war. Okay, yeah, Europe primarily. Okay.
So shifting theaters over to Asia. We have OSS detachments over there. We're in China, we're in Vietnam, we're in Korea. And Paul Helliwell was a colonel, and he was in the OSS in China. Well, at the same time, China was fighting to get rid of the Japanese out of China. They were fighting a civil war with Mao. And we obviously know they lost that war. When one of the warlords in the southwest area by the name of Chiang Kai-shek,
Paul Taiwan, right?
Yeah, well, yeah, let's get to that. So Chiang Kai-shek's, one of his, he had Tidwell over there, but also Paul Helliwell. Paul Helliwell's like looking around going, dude, you're funding this war with selling opium. What a great idea. You can buy a crap ton of weapons with cash money on the black market. Hey, Alan Dulles, you know that stay behind thing that you want to set up? How about if we fund it all covertly with drugs? Alan Dulles goes, that's a great idea. So why don't you figure out how all that works over there? So lots of luminaries go over there. One of them that I came across that I'm just totally fascinated with is a name you've never heard. Have you ever heard of William Pauly? No, no one has. He's like this big villain behind the scene that no one has ever heard of. William Pauly was presented as a multi-millionaire. He had the Curtiss aircraft franchise for Asia. He's one of the original funders of the Flying Tigers. He's the original guy behind Air America. He's the guy that actually put up the money for Sea Supply, the ships that eventually Chiang Kai-shek gets to float all of his opium around. He's a linchpin figure in that. And you will also find him as a sugar plantation owner in Cuba, you know, where we send all the drugs from Asia to be processed to come into the United States. Oh, he's there too. He owns the bus line. He owns the airline. He owns the everything there. And he's this guy that just mysteriously keeps popping up everywhere. I'm like, okay, so we're over in Asia. We're taking care of Chiang Kai-shek because we don't want to lose him. He's our opium guy. And he obviously loses to Mao and he gets kicked out of China. So we put him up in Burma. Well, the Burmese government allows him to operate there for a little bit of time, but there's all kinds of chaos because he's a drug lord. And we set up shop, Paul Helliwell sets up shop in Thailand. And so we're going to use Thailand because we spent $35 million paying off the national police and the seaports there and the airports so that nobody checks anything coming in and out of Thailand that has an American stamp on it. So that's going to be our processor. So when the Burmese government got tired of Chiang Kai-shek, the CIA is looking around going, okay, where can we put them? Oh, there's this little island over here called Formosa. And we're going to go over there and we're going to set up shop there. So they did. And they just flipped the shingle and said, okay, it's not Formosa anymore. It's Thailand or Taiwan. And, oh, by the way, I didn't know this. And again, I'm just embarrassed that I didn't because I have a master's degree in strategic studies that supposedly studied the entire world. But Taiwan is not just Taiwan. Taiwan is like 7 other islands. And they put the KMT army of Chiang Kai-shek on every one of those islands off the coast of China. And they spent the next 40 years attacking China with our money and the CIA behind it, constantly attacking China. And so as soon as Chiang Kai-shek gets set up there and all of their promotions are going, yeah, no, we're not okay with this. Number one, he's a Chinese general on a Chinese island, and somehow that's not China. And the Formosans are going, yeah, we didn't elect him. We don't want him. We thought you were all about democracy. And they're like, yeah, well, shut up. And so the KMT army killed tens of thousands of Formosans who rose up against the installation of a dictator. Because the very first thing Chiang Kai-shek does in Taiwan is implement martial law. And I was not aware that the whole time our media is telling us Taiwan's this wonderful democracy back in the 60s and 70s, it was living under martial law. They didn't undo the martial law until like in the 80s sometime. So from post-World War II until the 80s. Oh, and by the way, after they did that, and so now we don't have like a controlled dictatorship and no way of making it a critical element in our infrastructure. We mysteriously decided that's the best place out of the entire world to put microchips. So if you're Intel and you want to look for cheap labor, are you going to do it 5 seconds away from communist China? Not if you're a smart person. But that's not what that decision was made for. That decision was made for so that we can keep Taiwan under our control and be a pain in the butt to China forever. It's an ongoing strategy of tension. And so now we've got the opium set up. And we're trafficking opium out of Laos, Vietnam, because we put the French back in there. We didn't give them their freedom either. And we were never about freedom in any of these situations. It's never about democracy. So we make Vietnam basically a French colony again after the whole big freedom movement. And France is taking their opium and sending it to the Corsican mafia in Marseille to refine it. The American mafia, San Traficano and all of them, Lansky, the entire mafia, make several trips over to the Vietnam area, Thailand, and Taiwan. So their shipments are going to Sicily. Now, Sicily's mafia, their labs are not number 4 grade heroin level. They're kind of like the next layer down. So in the 1970s, Nixon's war on drugs was basically the war on killing 350 Corsican mafia guys and moving their mafia or their opium supply, heroin supply down to Sicily. So it was control of drugs, not elimination of drugs. So now all of it, and they figured out, they got the refinement situated. So all of the Sicilian heroin is coming into Cuba in the 50s. right, with the Batista, because we overthrew that government too and installed our puppet there. So Batista's got the mafia down there. They own everything. I just explained that with William Pauly as just one example, but there's a whole bunch of William Pauly's down there. And I had, when I got to this part in the story of the research about 2.5 years ago, I had somebody, when I was doing a Rumble show on it, say, hey, did you ever figure out what the oranges were all about in The Godfather? And I'm like, I don't remember oranges in The Godfather. Yeah, they were in every death scene. So of course, I had to go back and watch The Godfather. And I'm like, oh, that guy gets killed. He falls back into this thing of oranges. And they're talking about hitting somebody. And the only thing in the whole scene is this bowl of oranges in the middle of this very long table. And I'm like, oh, crap, I didn't even recognize that. So I'm reading a book and I find out that the preferred way of shipping the refined heroin into Cuba was in plastic oranges. So I got on, I think I was still on True Social at the time. I got on True Social and I'm like, I figured out the oranges. So it's been quite a journey. So anyway, that's the reason why we wanted to keep Cuba, is because we were using that as a drug processing place. And
here's just a quick search, there's always theories online of why the oranges are so important in The Godfather. It's interesting, right? How the oranges are the powerful symbol of death, but it's like what you say makes way more sense.
Everything to do with heroin.
Interesting.
Yes.
Okay.
That's how they were doing it.
So as you start, really, it's like, as you're describing all of these different elements, what I'm seeing is basically you're almost like we have a whiteboard and you're just kind of mapping out how the global syndicate operates. It's through military intelligence agencies. I'm sure it's heavily into big tech and into the Wall Street and the venture capitalists and the funding and InQtel and these kinds of things. But it's also drug trade, running the drug trade, which they learn from China.
They launder their money at
big tech and stock market.
Well, they money launder now. It's more in the big banks. They set up fake banks. One of the banks that Paul Helliwell set up specifically in the Cayman Islands was called Castle Bank. You find all kinds of very interesting people at Castle Bank, to include Paul Helliwell. But did you know, and at the time, so these were set up like in the early 70s. BCCI, have you heard of that bank?
Mm-mm.
Okay, the Bank of Credit and Commerce International was set up by a Pakistani guy. It was registered in Luxembourg, but actually ran out of the city of London. They became, within a couple of years of existence, the 7th largest bank in the entire world. And the entire thing was a CIA operation. All they did was launder drug money. 7th largest bank in the world. They laundered drug money and weapon sales money, illicit weapon sales. Oh, and people. And they also had, so that bank was set up primarily to deal with Afghanistan and Asia money. They also set up, well, primarily the Middle East, because at this point, when that was set up, it was Afghanistan, Turkey, and Northern Iran had a whole bunch of opium in it too. Then they set up Nugent Hand Bank in Australia to deal with the Asian money. So Nugent Hand was made up of a lawyer called Nugent and a Green Beret guy by the name of Hand, Major Hand. And Major Hand took care of the weapons and deals, and Hand was the money guy for the drug money. And both of those banks, along with Castle Bank, was all set up by the CIA to do nothing but money launder. Now, those both, BCCI got exposed in, I think, 1992. And so as it's going down the tubes and getting exposed, somebody takes out Nugent. He's found assassinated in his Mercedes car. And so the big banks basically take over. If you just do a search on money laundering of large banks like UBS, HSBC, Credit Suisse, Chase, who we know is just involved with Jeffrey Epstein, you're going to find that there's like trillions of dollars in money laundering, and no one ever goes to jail. They pay a fine. And the fine is like not even 1% of the money that they're found guilty of money trafficking. That's because it's controlled. The entire thing is controlled. They know there's going to be a cost of doing it, and they don't care. So when you get Asia obviously is still in play to some extent, but that starts winding down after the Vietnam War, right, in the 70s. So where do we go? We immediately flip to Afghanistan, and we've got to get the opium going there. So we basically bait the Soviet Union in, and that's a whole story as well, because there was a false flag involved there too. And by the way, we overthrew the king there too, in order to get our puppet in there to get him to do what we wanted for the engagement with the Soviet Union. So now we're in Afghanistan. Opium just skyrockets there. What happens after we pull out of Afghanistan? The Taliban takes over, and the Taliban, you've been taught, is the really, really bad guys, right? Well, in 2000, do any search on any search engine and ask for the 20 years, 10 years before and 10 years after the year 2000 on opium production. You're going to see that in the year 2000, it basically goes away. Well, what happened? Oh, 2001, 9/11, and we're back in Afghanistan, and it skyrockets to peaks that it had never seen before. So I don't think that's a coincidence. And so after we kind of get that going back again, we move in the 80s down to late 70s, early 80s, down to the Crystal Triangle. So we've got the Golden Triangle, the Crescent Triangle, and now we got the Crystal Triangle down in South America. And it's primarily focused on the coca leaf creating cocaine. Now, here's one of the observations, just to get the whole loop in here. I had no idea until I started doing this project, the amount of chemicals that is required to make heroin and cocaine. It's tons and tons. It's a very complicated process. And as a matter of fact, if you just look in Taiwan at how many pharmaceuticals, because that's how they hide them, they're chemical or pharmaceutical labs. There's a crap ton on a tiny island of pharmaceutical. What are they manufacturing there? So when I got to the Crystal Triangle, and I didn't even know there was a thing until about 6 months ago, but it's actually the name of it. You look at Colombia and you go back to the late 70s. Well, if it takes tons and tons of chemicals and they have no chemical production capability in anywhere in Latin America, where's that chemical coming from? Oh, the United States, the same transnational syndicate. So they're just mysteriously shipping a crap ton of the 4 chemicals it requires to make cocaine, and no one says anything? Well, eventually somebody said something and Congress forbid them from doing it. And they knew all along, but until somebody said something, they didn't care. And then you see some joint ventures over in China of US companies and chemical companies in China. So then where did all of the chemicals start coming from? China. But DuPont, Dow, all of those chemical companies were involved in this, and they knew they were involved in it. As a matter of fact, one of the DuPont direct relatives, his last name because of marriage, it was a female DuPont to a male Hitchcock. He literally is the guy that was selling all the LSD to the CIA for MK Ultra. And there's so many of these companies that are like the rubber companies, the Goodyear, Goodrich were involved in the machinations in Vietnam. There were big rubber plantations in Africa, which is the reason why we overthrew a bunch of countries there. Rubber in Brazil, we overthrew that country in like 1963, all for these resources. So now we get to Colombia, and I just spent like the last 6 months really focusing on that whole operation. And that's why when the recent uh, target of this Venezuelan fishing boat, I was like, yeah, that's not a Venezuelan fishing boat. You may have put a couple of Venezuelans on a boat, but that they don't make cocaine in Venezuela. They make it in Colombia. Depending on who you ask, the lowest number I've ever seen is 82%, but I've seen as high as 98% of all cocaine in America comes from Colombia. And so I'm like, there's a Colombian in there somewhere. And so like hit number 3, the Colombian government announced, hey, you took our people. And I'm like, bingo, I knew there's Colombians in there somewhere. But Colombia is the heart. So as soon as that happened, I told my audience, you're going to see 3 things happen. There's a formal agreement with anybody that is a large producer of drugs, which Colombia is, that you will sign an agreement saying that you will work with us to eradicate drugs. I said, that will be pulled. It happened. The next thing that will happen is all foreign aid will be cut off to Colombia. That's happened. The next thing that's going to happen is we're going to go in there and dismantle every freaking thing in Colombia that has anything to do with the production of cocaine. That's what I'm waiting on, because until that happens, the entire country of no one president, even if that guy's a good guy, can take out, because there's a narco elite, and their Gladio program in Venezuela has 20,000 paramilitary trained to protect the drug trade. 20,000. And you got to take them all out. They've not ever done anything other than be a narco guard. That's all they've ever done their entire life. And the US and the CIA trained them. We literally bring them here to train them. We go there and train them. We train them to do exactly what they're doing.
And so I've got a million questions, but I'm going to try to narrow myself into just a couple. But my big one is, how do you make sense of all this in terms of America today with what's happening in our country, and looking at the tension, looking at the racial tension, the Charlie Kirk assassination, the the stabbings of people, like the Irina, the woman that was stabbed on the bus that became viral. And I mean, it seems like from my perspective, what we're seeing in America is we're seeing the tension. Like if you could measure tension, you're seeing it go up and up and up and up. So how do you make sense of what's happening right now in America, and what do you think comes next?
So I would take you back to the first Trump term, because we experienced much the same thing. That's my gauge of whether they're with the syndicate or they're not with the syndicate. If he was with the syndicate, none of that crap happened to Biden. None of that crap happened to Obama. None of it happened to Clinton. None of it happened to the Bushes. It happened to Trump. So they tried 4 soft coups against Trump. The Russiagate thing, the Ukraine phone call, blah, blah, blah. So he's not part of them. Now, I view Trump's first term with some of the people he hired, to include Bolton and Elliot Abrams, who's a convicted Iran-Contra guy. He's literally a criminal that was pardoned by Bush Sr., involved in the overthrow of Nicaragua. During Trump's first administration, him and Bolton were involved in trying to overthrow Venezuela in 2019. Those 2 people specifically, along with Mike Pompeo. But I viewed that entire operation as bringing those people into his administration, because one of the things most people who've never been in the military doesn't understand, if they're on the government payroll, everything they do on their government phone and on their computer is viewable without a subpoena. You have everything. You have all of the people they talk to. You can monitor any phone line without a subpoena. they have everything. And I believe that's what that whole 4 years was about, is trying to network everything that I've just explained to you. The foreign people that are involved in it. So when he hit the ground running earlier this year, the tension exploded, because that's the way they control people. And if you listen, don't get involved in it. If you listen and you watch the way both on the right and the left, you just heard Lindsey Graham screaming like a stuck pig about killing people, and he's fine with it. And you have the people on the left screaming about killing people. They are doing this on purpose to get your emotional temperature up so they can control you. Oh my God, please save me. I don't like all of this tension. And then you just look for the government, for the people that can calm it back down. And it's not going to be the people that are going to fix it that are going to calm it down. The people that are going to fix it is going to have to do things like ICE is doing right now to get those people the hell out of our country. That's not going to be emotionally satisfying for people who have been taught to watch all of these stupid reality shows that hook them emotionally, and they're on this artificial emotional high on social media literally every day. So if those people are doing the things, the people that are hooked on the emotion are going to fall for it every single time. What you have to do is disengage yourself mentally and evaluate what is happening on what's best for your personal individual interest. Having illegal aliens, especially the criminal ones, but all of them, out of this country is beneficial for every single American. And regardless of how much pain it's going to cause, every single one of those people are bringing that pain on themselves by staying here. They are all free to leave. They get money to leave and a free ticket. If you choose not to do that, then, and I think that whole thing was brilliant. You know, initially, because I'm very fiscally conservative, I was like, why are you paying them? Just stick their butt on an airplane. And I'm like, no, that's brilliant. That's really brilliant, because now people who are like me will go, they were willing to pay you and you're still here. You know what I mean? So it kind of softens the rhetoric around how evil Trump is by making, no, he's literally paying them to leave. Nobody paid them to come here that we know of.
And so do you, if you look at this Gladio playbook, which is, again, strategy of tension, you know, driving people into the middle, and you have the increasing of tension, and it keeps building and building and building until it pops. And that pop usually is when you'll have civil war, you'll have a coup, you'll have a number of things, that a false flag event that create especially for the people of that country, it creates this emotional kind of trauma and shift that is they're able to use to redirect into a massive shift in society, where they come in and bring in,
and they're the saviors.
Exactly. And so do you think, like, do you see that do you predict an increasing tension here in this country? Like, you know, these Gladio units and everything that's happening, do you think that they're going to continue to try to dial up this tension to create that in our country?
Yes. That is their playbook. What I'm seeing, though, is a lot of preempting of that. The recent takedown of that terror cell that just happened in the last 48 hours or 72 hours. There does seem to be a heightened level of preemptive taking down. And I don't know if you've paid attention, because I pay attention to the monumental amount of drug busts that are happening. Literally tons coming into the Houston port, massive amounts of drugs being intercepted. That tells me that they're out ahead of the network. that they're watching them. And I explained that to somebody the other day. They were like, they're just like randomly blowing up boats. And I said, no, they're not. I said, if you understand militarily, the Caribbean is a very big body of water. They found a tiny little boat. They didn't just find that tiny little boat. They tracked that tiny little boat from where it started until it got into international waters. That's a level of surveillance that most people have no clue about. We have the capability to see what color eyes you are from space. And that level, although I know all about the whole digital ID and all that other crap, but in these operations, that level of surveillance, of illegality going on, for the people sitting in Colombia who have 20 of those boats going out every 15 minutes, they're going, oh shit, how'd they get that one? And then another one, and then we're going to go over the Pacific, and we're going to get those coming off the coast over there too. Oh crap. It looks now to them like we have the entire, and we just got a sub. I said, you guys buckle up, because a crap ton of that's coming in by air. And when we start taking down aircraft, whether it's in the air or on the ground, there's going to be a whole lot of ruckus around that. A crap ton of it comes in by air. So I think that there is such a level now of awareness of the criminals, that we have our eyes on you, that they're in a state of panic. And it's better they be in a state of panic than us.
Exactly. Well, we've already gone not well past an hour, but we've already hit our hour mark, and I want to be mindful of your time. And I feel like there's going to be a part 2 and part 3 to this discussion, because I think that we could spend hours just talking about Europe post World War II. I have a feeling that you've got a lot more to say about that. But as we are wrapping up, I want to make sure that I bring attention to your Twitter. I still call it Twitter. I don't like these X. X is stupid. Your Twitter profile, which I'll make sure that I link in the description, which is just, it's at Colonel Towner. And also I want to highlight on your Twitter profile here, if you click on view more of your profile here, you have your links to your Gladio one-on-one, your Substack, your Rumble account, and your online store if people want to purchase your merchandise. So I'll make sure that's linked below. And I want to thank you for responding to my Twitter DM. I said, hey, how about we do a show together? Because I saw you, and I'm fascinated by this stuff. But I also just want to thank you for doing what you're doing and trying to get this information out. You're doing a good job at it. It's apparent that you're very well researched. And I guess I'll just ask you if you have any final thoughts as we're wrapping up today.
So just a little bit about how I do this. On X, I have a 4 o'clock show almost every day. I do travel quite a bit, like I'm leaving tomorrow. So I won't be doing a 4 o'clock show for a couple of days, but generally Monday through Friday, I have a 4 o'clock show, and we go through books. Like I said, I've read over 120 books on this. So I pick out from those books that I've read. They're all on my Rumble, and we have them organized. If you go on a laptop, not your app, there's a playlist button, and it drops down each book that I've done and all of the different parts of that book. Currently, we're doing a book by Anya Parapil, I'm not going to pronounce her name correctly, that's called Corporate Coup, and it's all about Venezuela and its recent history. We will follow that book. Yeah, there they are. We will follow that book by this book here called The Mafia, the CIA, and George Bush. That's going to be our next book when we get done with Anya's book. And this book, The Mafia, CIA, and George Bush, is all about the failings of the savings and loans. And people would go, well, what's that got to do with Gladio? It has everything to do with Gladio, because and again, I was shocked. The savings and loan debacle happened in the 1980s. What else happened in the 80s? Oh, Iran-Contra. Oh, the crack cocaine in Southeast Los Angeles and paying for using drugs to pay for the Contras, all laundered through the savings and loans in a very small group of people that purposely collapsed the savings and loan. It is literally with, and I just explained how the mafia is in it, CIA, and the politicians in that book. And William Polly makes a guest appearance in the book. I just about fell out of my chair. I mean, the man is literally everywhere.
So I encourage people. I'll pull that up again. So I'll make sure again your links are in there. But so
Yes.
as you mentioned on your Rumble channel, if you go over to playlists, and this is again not on the app, it's on a desktop, then you can see all of your different playlists where you're going over different books, and you've got, you know, 11 videos on hidden towers. You've got, you know, so anyway, you have all the information there in addition to your main, you know, channel information. So, well, Colonel, it's been a pleasure speaking with you. This is our first time meeting, so it's a pleasure meeting you. I really enjoy speaking with you, and thank you. We'll definitely do this again. I really appreciate your time.